embracing spirituality rather than being skeptical of it or hesitant about it. And I begin with a story that was on the news a few years ago, and it went viral. It was this day in the courtroom of Judge Mindy Glazer. She is a judge in Miami-Dade courtroom, and there was this 49-year-old named Arthur Booth who appeared before her for his bond hearing. Arthur had been arrested the previous day for breaking into a home, stealing a car, and then leading the police on a miles-long street chase. He caused 2 accidents before he was finally caught, stopped, and arrested. What happened in that courtroom was almost too fantastic to be real and unscripted. The Judge Glazer, is shuffling through papers on her desk, and she stops for a moment and she looks up, and it's recorded. Her courtroom was on recording, and you see her just looking at papers, then looking up, and then she's staring at Mr. Booth and looking back at her papers. And then she looks up at Mr. Booth and she says, "I have a question for you. Did you go to Nautilus for middle school?" And Booth is a little startled. He looks up and he recognized her. And then he covered his face with both hands, and he's overwhelmed with emotion, and he cries out, "Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness!" The judge then said, "I'm so sorry to see you here. I always wondered what happened to you." And she then turned to the courtroom and she continued and she said, "This was the nicest kid in middle school. He was the best kid in school. We used to play football together. And now, sadly, look what happened." At this point, Arthur Booth was crying uncontrollably, moving about frantically in his place, repeating over and over again, "Oh my goodness, oh my goodness." Judge Glazer set the bond at $43,000, and she closed the hearing by saying, "Mr. Booth, I hope you're able to change your ways, to come out of this okay, and live a lawful life. Good luck to you, sir." After the hearing, Booth's cousin was interviewed, and she was asked why she thought her cousin was so deeply distraught at the moment. And she said he was probably thinking, "I had those same opportunities that Judge Mindy Glazer had. That could have been me up there. I could have been an attorney too. I could have been a judge too, just like my classmate and friend Mindy." And he was so overwhelmed with emotion because he was so filled with remorse and with the thoughts of what could have been. This was an incredible encounter itself, but I'll give you the epilogue to the story. 10 months later, Arthur Booth was given an early release from prison for good behavior. And standing there to greet him at the correctional facility upon his release were members of his family and Judge Mindy Glazer. This too was captured on video. After hugging his family, Booth fell into his former classmate's arms. Looking him in the eye, Judge Glazer said, "You gotta take care of your family. Try and get a job. Stay clean. You're gonna do something good for somebody else out there. This is a group effort. Don't let us down." "I won't," he promised. "I won't," cried Arthur Booth. And as they bid farewell, they resolved that the next time they'd meet would not be in a courtroom, but at a class reunion. There's something so poignant and so powerful about that moment of recognition between Judge Glazer and Arthur Booth in this courtroom. And I think of this story and I think about God looking at each and every single one of us, looking up from his papers and saying, "Is that you? Is that you? I knew you since childhood. I knew your potential. I knew what you were capable of." And the truth is, we know it too. In 2018, residents of the island of Hawaii woke up to an emergency alert on their phones. This is what the alert said. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. With the situation between the United States and North Korea at that time being very tense, Hawaiians understandably panicked, believing that they were the target of a nuclear attack. Some ran into basements, others hid under tables, some climbed down manholes in the street. It took a full 38 minutes until the state finally issued a correction explaining that the warning was a false alarm, that the Emergency Operations Center informed the world that one of their employees had simply pressed the wrong button. Oops. But for 38 minutes, 1.4 million people scrambled to try to find someplace secure for their safety. But they also did something else. Thinking that a catastrophic attack, a nuclear holocaust, God forbid, was imminent, they were forced to consider how they wanted to spend their last moments on Earth. Thank God the warning was a false alarm and the extent of the damage was just a lot of anxiety. But nevertheless, I think there's a lesson for all of us in Hawaii's unfortunate experience. If you had 38 minutes to live, how would you spend them? What would you reach for? Who would you call? Would you open a prayer book? Would you say the Shema? Would you reach for a phone to tell someone that you love them? Would you contact someone that you felt you owed an apology to and you wanted to reconcile in your last 38 minutes? What would you do? What would you do if you thought you had a very limited amount of time left? Which I think leads to the natural follow-up question. And why aren't you doing that now? As a rather insightful country song goes, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. For 38 minutes on the morning of January 13th, the people of Hawaii had that chance. But why wait for such a terrifying situation or an emergency alert to get us to think? It reminds me of something Rabbi Benjamin Blech shared with me a few years ago. Rabbi Blech is an author. He served as a professor of Talmudic studies at Yeshiva University for over 37 years. And we often meet in the summers at JLI retreats where we're both guest lecturers. And Rabbi Blech says this. He says, if you ever go to the New York subway system, the Metropolitan Transit Authority issues these cards that you slide through the turnstile in order to get through to the train station. And there are these automated kiosks near the turnstiles where you add credit to your card. That you can either buy a certain number of rides and put that value on the card. So let's say you put $30 on your card, which grants you 10 rides, and they throw in some type of discount the more you purchase. Or there's another option. And the other option is a flat fee for a certain amount of time. Let's say you buy 7 days or 30 days, and during that period of time, you could ride as often as you want. So last year, Rabbi Blech says, just before Yom Kippur, he's about to re-up his card, and he comes to the machine and it's offering this choice. Do you want more time or do you want value? He says, which do I want? See, he's a very deep and thoughtful person. And this is right before Yom Kippur, and it suddenly becomes this existential question for him. Binyamin, do you want more time on this earth, or do you want more value while on it? In a couple of days from now, he thought to himself, I'm going to be pleading with the Almighty to give me another year. Is that what I want? More time to occupy space, or do I want more value to bring new meaning and purpose to my life throughout the next year of my life? And the initial answer, of course, is I want both. But what if, like the Metro card machine, I was only able to be offered one or the other? Which one would I choose? And he says, I thought about some of the greatest people of the past. Some of them lived long lives, others not so long. But what we remember most about them is not how long they lived, but how they lived. And at that point, he's standing in the New York subway station, taking up space in front of a kiosk where the angry New Yorkers are saying, hey, are you buying something here or not? As he's having this philosophical discussion with himself. The truth is, he said, that more time is not really up to me. That's in God's hands. But the value that I invest in my life, that's completely up to me. That's my choice to make. And hopefully, if I choose more value, God will be kind enough to grant me more time. Because far more important than counting our days is making our days count. To which I'm sure the angry New Yorkers said, okay, now could you get out of the way? There's a PS to this. After undergoing an annual physical, Rabbi Blech was told by his doctor that he needed to call his wife Elaine so that they would both be in the room when he shared what he needed to share. And you know that's never good news. And the gist of it was that he was diagnosed with a fatal disease for which there was no cure. And after this diagnosis, the doctor said, you basically have 6 months to live. You see, that was back in 2011. 7 years later, he was having this discussion with a kiosk in New York. And still today, at age 87, he continues to teach and to lecture and write in vigorous fashion. So God has indeed blessed him with both, Ad Me'ov Estrim until 120. What does it mean to opt for more value? First and foremost, it means realizing that life is not something that's going to happen to us. It's something that is happening to us, and it's happening right now. This elderly person put it this way. She said, first, I was dying to finish high school and start college. Then I was dying to finish college and start working. Then I was dying for my children to grow old enough for school so I could return to work. And then I was dying to retire. And now I'm dying. And suddenly I realize I forgot to live. So let's not forget to live. And I mean to really live. As many of you know, I'm a sports fan. I like baseball. I like the Yankees, which, by the way, they are still undefeated in the year 2020. Who would have thought? Almost May 1st, Yankees are still undefeated. I'm a football fan. I like the Jets and the Giants. Not so thrilled with some of the draft picks a few days ago. I enjoy going to sport games with my children. And yes, I do always want my team to win. But for some, it becomes their lives. It becomes so intense. It becomes so fanatical. And the jeering and at times the actual fistfights that can break out if someone's wearing a jersey that's not of your team. You see, as human beings, we're all searching and reaching for something to lift us out of ourselves, to take us away from our cares, from our worries, from our mundane realities. And we have this innate desire to be uplifted, for surges of emotional energy, for something more, for something higher, for something transcendent. And so many people invest that desire for inspiration and elevation into cheering for their team to the point of obsession. Don't get me wrong, sports is great. It's a wonderful diversion. And when our team wins, we can forget about our troubles for a little while and be part of something bigger. A loyal fan base celebrating together. I totally get it. But then it ends and the reality of our lives is still there waiting for us. There's a group called High on Life, whereby young people take videos of themselves performing death-defying stunts in canyons and cliffs and deep oceans and across high-peak mountaintops, and they post it on the internet. And again, I understand taking on these challenges and pushing oneself to the limit. I can even understand for some the thrill of jumping out of an airplane and experiencing free fall, this exhilarating rush. Not that I would ever do it, but I can understand it. I mean, you can imagine a Jewish kid trying to tell his mother, this classic Yiddish mama, that he wants to walk across a canyon on a rope or jump out of an airplane at 12,000 feet. The Yiddish mama says, "Was bist du, sugar? Are you crazy?" The first thing a Jewish mother tells her kid, even a 40-year-old, when he's about to leave the house, take a jacket, you're going to catch a cold. It's not warm enough, take a sweater. If the kid coughs more than once in 8 minutes, I'm making an appointment with the doctor right now. The poor Jewish kid that goes skydiving shows up in 16 layers of clothing and a suitcase of food just in case he gets hungry on the trip. He has a pastrami sandwich, he has a knish, he has a sour pickle, he has some leftover gefilte fish, and he's parachuting down at rest. He's eating because he's Jewish, and his mama told him that you have to eat. Look at you, you're just skins and bones. I get the adrenaline rush. Scaling tall mountains, I can get to some degree, but when it's risking your life, when you call it being high on life, that's something else. That to me is this craving for transcendence gone awry. Here's the deal. Man is made up of body and soul. If your body is lacking something, let's say iron, for example, and you develop iron deficiency anemia, you'll go to the doctor and he'll prescribe supplements. If the doctor gives you extra vitamin A for your iron deficiency anemia, it won't help. It has to be iron. The same is true with our soul. Oftentimes we suffer from a condition Rabbi Bryski calls spirituality deficiency syndrome. Let's call it SDS. If you try to cure SDS, the yearning of the soul, the need of the soul, by taking another vacation, another thrill, you may feel better for a while, but you will not truly be happy because it will not fill the void in your soul. That you have a soul means that you have an innate need for spirituality. No less than your body has an innate need for its essential minerals and vitamins. If you're suffering from boredom in life, and by boredom I don't mean you have nothing to do, but you're bored and unmoved by life itself, that you live a life of quiet desperation and are afraid to face the difficult questions that life raises, you probably have some form of SDS, spirituality deficiency syndrome. If you find that you lack empathy, that you're so wrapped up in your own issues and problems that you cannot feel someone else's pain, you may be suffering from some form of SDS, spirituality deficiency syndrome. If you're preoccupied with the physical, with material needs, to where you never seem to have enough stuff, and you're constantly trying to fill inner voids with more things that you don't need, or by surfing the net, or by binge eating, or binge watching, it may be a psychological issue, or it may be SDS, spirituality deficiency syndrome. And for us Jews, this condition tends to be even more intense than it is for most of us. Why is that? It's because God says to us in the Torah, Kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. You, the children of Israel, shall be holy because I, God, your God, am holy. That's not just an imperative. It's a statement of fact, a statement of the essence of the Jew. You shall be holy. In other words, you will be holy, as in you have no choice in the matter. Kedoshim tiyu. Holy you are, and holy you shall be. There's no getting away from it. This is why we Jews are the ones who suffer most from spirituality deficiency syndrome, because we're always the first ones to chase every ism, every cult, every mishigas out there in quest of that something more, because something within our soul is telling us we're lacking something, we need something, and we can't put our finger at it. You may have heard the story of an elderly Jewish woman. She sets out from a home in Brooklyn to go to India. She has this need, she has this desire, this lifelong dream to see the holy Guru Maharishi Baba Ganoush. And so she leaves JFK for Mumbai. She takes a small jet plane then to a remote airport. From there, she takes a taxi to this bridge at the edge of a mountainous area. And the rest, she's told, she will need to travel miles and miles and miles by foot. She schleps for days over hilltops, over mountains. She crosses valleys and streams, and she finally arrives in this small rural village alongside a steep mountain. At the top of that mountain is the ashram, and there it houses the great spiritual leader, Maharishi Baba Ganush. And after climbing for many long hours, she reaches the mountaintop and she announces that she has come to see the Holy Guru. That's impossible, the assistant said. Nobody is allowed to see the great Guru for the next 6 months. 6 months I traveled all this way. I took one plane to a small plane. I took a taxi and then I walked and I walked and I walked and I climbed the mountain. I must see him. I must see him. I must see him. I'm sorry, but there's no exceptions. He's in total solitary right now for 6 months. No, I must see him. And she sits herself down by the entrance to the ashram. She's not leaving. She's going to fast. She's going to go for days of fasting. And indeed, one day, a second day, a third day, she's not budging. The assistant realizes, all right, I'm gonna have to make an exception for this woman. She's traveled all this way. She really has to see him. He says, look, I'll let you in, but I'm going to tell you this. I'm giving you 3 words. That's it. You can only speak to him for 3 words. She agrees. I'll take it. She makes her way in, and she makes her way through all the hallways with sheets hanging. And there at the end of the tunnel, after this archway, is this young man, the holy Maharishi Baba Ganush, sitting on a bamboo mat in this yoga position, and he's chanting. The woman steps in front of him. She looks him straight in the eye, and she says, Sheldon, come home. The Jews. It's always the Jews going to the ends of the earth to search, when in fact it's all sitting and waiting for us right here at home, within our own Yiddishkeit, within our own Judaism. Without proper dosages of spirituality, our souls remain starving. Think of it this way. Suppose you have a small 4-cylinder car. Although the performance of this vehicle may be somewhat limited, as long as all 4 cylinders are working, it's going to do its job. It's going to get you from point A to point B. On the other hand, if you have a car with a powerful 8-cylinder engine, but 2 of those cylinders are not working, but you still have 6 cylinders that are working. That's more than the 4 that were working in the 4-cylinder car. You're now in an 8-cylinder car with 6 cylinders. But because 2 are not working properly, that car is going to have difficulties. Even though it has more strength in its 6 cylinders than the 4, but because there is something lacking, it won't drive. It won't get you from point A to point B the way the 4-cylinder car can. You see, the function of a dynamic system is dependent upon the proper operation of all its components. Greater capacity is an advantage when it's utilized, but it becomes a disadvantage when it's not utilized. The nations of the world were given the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, 7 mitzvos, 7 categories of behavior to live by. The Jewish people were given 613 mitzvos. And just like this 8-cylinder engine, when too many of our capacities are not in working order, we become even less spiritually functional than those with the 7 mitzvah engine. Story is told of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. He was once residing in the building on which he was told that there was a Jewish tailor living on the 5th floor who was passionately anti-religious. The Rebbe, who was physically handicapped by then, asked to be carried up the 5 stories of this building in his wheelchair because he wanted to see the tailor. The Hasidim tried to dissuade him. They said, it's not a good idea. This man is very, very hostile. He's very antagonistic towards Judaism and religious Jews. It's not going to go very well. But the Rebbe insisted on being brought upstairs, and he knocked on the door. And the tailor opens the door and he sees the Rebbe, and he instinctively recoils with anger. Why are you here? I think you came to the wrong house, to the wrong apartment. Oh no, said the Rebbe. I came to the right place. I'm here to have you sew a button on my jacket. So the tailor replied, I don't believe that you came up 5 flights for me to sew on a button. Yes, said the Rebbe. And I don't believe that your soul came down so many flights so that you can sew buttons. Boom. As they call it today, mic drop. The man just stood there gazing at the Rebbe. His soul melted on the spot. And over time, they built up a friendship, and this tailor became a disciple of the Rebbe. My friends, there is a deep and monumental purpose, a spiritual purpose to our soul coming down all those flights, to our being here on this earth. A passive life, a life that just passes the time, is an anxious life. A healthy life is one that makes a difference, one that uplifts everyone and everything it comes in contact with and brings more light into the world. Adam Newman is a young billionaire, is considered one of the most promising Israeli businessmen. At the age of 38, he's the owner of WeWork. And yes, it's going through some financial difficulties now during this lockdown of time, but certainly it will bounce back like the rest of our economy will. But Adam Newman talks about his busy schedule and his flights and running a company, a billion-dollar company with 3,000 employees, 238 locations, 56 cities across 18 countries. He's a busy CEO. And in a recent interview, he told the reporter that he started keeping Shabbat with his wife and 5 children for the past few years. And he explained Shabbat. I totally disconnect. I will talk to absolutely no one on any business-related matter, and I'm not going to compromise on it. At first, it was very difficult, and it seemed like a burden, but now all I see is the time it gives me with my wife, with my children, with my close friends. I can have the craziest week. I can have the busiest week, but the moment it's Friday and my wife lights those Shabbat candles, we're ready for Shabbat, and that's it. A new dimension of life begins. Our friends join us for Shabbat dinner, and at that time we're disconnected from the outside world. But in the reality, we're so connected. And I now spend so much time with my family. I even see my mother more. And this makes the keeping of Shabbat so special to us. Folks, I know that spirituality is a difficult concept for some of us to wrap our heads around. What is spirituality? Is there even such a thing? You talk about God and souls and spiritual forces and celestial beings. Are these things real? Indeed, the predominant thinking in secular society is that if something can't be seen and can't be smelled and can't be touched or detected by scientific instruments, then it doesn't exist. Yet everyone who feels love in their heart knows that that's not true. Love is a spiritual force that can either override even the most basic physical instinct of self-preservation. We'll give up our very lives for people that we love. We all recognize other attributes of the soul. Courage. Can you measure it? Can you find it in the laboratory? But we know it's there. Loyalty, devotion to truth, remorse, mercy, compassion, forgiveness, the search for meaning. We all know these are real, despite science's inability to measure them. As a matter of fact, as Jews, we not only believe that the spiritual is real, but that the spiritual directly affects and can alter the physical. You know, looking at it from a distance, people tend to think that Torah is just about laws and rituals and quaint stories. The truth is that Torah connects us to the spiritual. Each and every mitzvah of the Torah is a vehicle for our soul's expression. It's the vitamin for our soul. It's what our soul yearns for. It gives us that spiritual energy to truly live. When Aaron Leib Bergman was born in 1934 in a small Polish hometown to a learned family, the plan was that he would reach school age and then he would go off to study in a local cheder and then move on to an institute of higher learning in his quest to become a Torah scholar. That was the dream. Well, Hitler Yamach Shemai thwarted all of that. And at an age most children begin attending first grade, Aaron Leib witnessed his parents' execution. Instead of embarking on a journey into the worlds of Torah and Chumash and Mishnah and Talmud, Aaron Leib was in hiding, surviving on grass and hay. The year 1945 brought with it the liberation of what remained of Europe's Jews. But many youngsters like Aaron Leib, whose entire family had been wiped out, were so lost and so alone. Divine Providence, however, led Aaron Leib to the shores of Ellis Island. A generous family agreed to house him for the time being. This kind family, however, didn't understand what he had been through. How could they? And so his next 2 years were filled with great sadness and great pain. During this time, he visited one New York yeshiva after another, asking to be admitted. He wanted to go to yeshiva, the dream that he had in life as a little infant, as a little child. But sadly, the answers were pretty much the same across the board. We don't have a place for you. At your age, and you can't even read the Hebrew alphabet, and you never studied the Chumash, you've never studied from the text of the Torah. Kids your age are already studying the Talmud, but how would you be able to join a class in Talmud if you don't even know how to read? I'm sorry, we don't have a place for you. School to school, this boy went, begging for a place in their school. There's no place for him. No place for a 13-year-old that didn't know the very basics of Judaism. No fault of his own. He continued to get this response from one school after the next, and he was about to abandon this notion of ever receiving a Torah education, decided to give it one last shot. He took a bus to a yeshiva called Torah Chaim, and he walked down the corridors of this yeshiva, and the sounds of children learning and studying reverberated in his ears. The feeling was so bittersweet because this was the atmosphere that he wanted to be part of, and yet it was being denied him. He walked into the office of the principal. His name was Rabbi Moshe Krupnik, and he sat down. Rabbi Krupnik listened to this boy Aaron Leib with a very sympathetic ear. But just as his hopes were rising that maybe this school would accept him, Rabbi Krupnik's words sent this hope crashing down. I'm so sorry, but we have nowhere to place a 13-year-old boy who doesn't know how to learn Chumash, doesn't know how to read the alphabet. I mean, I can't put you in the kindergarten class. That would be ludicrous. Aaron Leib says, look, I don't mind. Put me in the kindergarten class. Let me start learning somewhere. I'll work my way up. I'm not embarrassed. I'll sit in the kindergarten class and learn the alphabet. Let me in. I'm sorry, the principal said. It would just be too awkward for everyone involved. Aaron Leib started crying. The despair, the disappointment building up inside of all these months and years finally reached this crescendo, and the tears came bursting out. And finally he says to this principal, to Rabbi Krupnik, he says, you know what? Fine. Don't accept me in yeshiva, but I'm going to ask you for two favors, and don't deny me these favors. Number one, I want you to write a letter for me now. I want to take it with me before I leave. And I want the letter to say that I, Aaron Leib, came to the school and begged to be admitted, and you said that there was no place for me. You said that it would be ludicrous to put me in a kindergarten class. Just write it, put it in writing exactly what you said to me. And the second favor I ask is make sure that when I die, the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society, buries me with that letter in my hand. Because when I face God, I want to tell God that I tried, that I really tried. I did my best, but you wouldn't let me in. Rabbi Krupnik looked at Aaron Leib in stunned awe, realizing how the system has failed this young, broken boy. And he rushed over to him, and he held him, and he cried together with him, and he said, you're right. I'm so wrong, and I'm so sorry. And he took him into a kindergarten classroom, and he said, kids, we have a very special guest, and he's going to be spending some time in your classroom together with you. And he quickly learned the Aleph Beit, and he made it to first grade, and to second grade, and to third grade, and to fourth. And he climbed, and he climbed, and he worked, and he worked. And sure enough, he made his way to his age group in no time at all. In later years, Rabbi Bergman became a legendary teacher of Torah for young children. Today, some 70 years later, Rabbi Bergman in his 80s is still teaching Torah to young men in Jerusalem. The fact is, it's never too late. It's never awkward. It's never ludicrous to embark on a new journey of discovering the Torah and embracing a new spiritual path in life. You see, in some ways, spiritual deficiency syndrome is a gift. It's a gift. It's our soul telling us that it's hungry, that it needs to be fed, not with empty calories and transitory thrills. We don't need to jump off a cliff or climb Mount Everest to feel alive. What we need is value. What we need is purpose. What we need is connection. What we need is meaning. And Torah and Yiddishkeit and spirituality provides us with so many different ways of attaining those. We shouldn't feel trapped by our habits and self-imposed limitations. We're not rocks subject to the laws of gravity. We're not empty baskets floating on the surface of an ocean just going with the flow. We are Jews. We are godly souls capable of pushing back against gravity, capable of raising ourselves up, of transcending nature itself. That's who we are. Somebody once said, don't live the same year 75 times and call it a life. Let's break out of our ruts and be extraordinary. Let's embrace a life of renewed and heightened spirituality. And the more spiritual our behavior, the more tuned in we become to the spiritual dynamics of heaven and earth. And as such, on the level of soul, we start feeling spirituality in everything we do, not just in this world. We start feeling connections to our loved ones in the world to come, because our soul connects to their soul. Because our loved ones in the heavenly worlds, our bubbies and our zaydis, or our mommies and our tatis, or our uncles, our aunts, or our siblings, they're still alive in the heavenly world in soul. And the more in touch we can be with our soul, the more we feel them alive. I'd like to share a moving story with you. 10 years ago, at a huge event that was scheduled in New York, it was scheduled for thousands of children under the age of bar mitzvah to come together in a large hall in Brooklyn, New York, to recite from the book of Psalms together. At that time, Israel was going through very difficult times, and it was decided that the innocence of the prayers of children would definitely break through the heavenly gates and go to the throne of the Almighty and see to it indeed that God protects the Holy Land of Israel. And so the idea was, let's just fill the room with children, thousands of children. And the program was to be led by a few words of inspiration by Jewish leaders, followed by an adult cantor chanting from the podium words of Tehillim, words from the book of Psalms, verse by verse, and then the children would repeat these words verse by verse. Prior to the event, and the entire crew spent the entire morning arranging the room in preparation for the thousands of children planning to attend this awe-inspiring gathering. By all accounts, this was not going to be an empty seat. Kids were coming from all parts of New York City. With most of the space in this big ballroom being used for the seating for the children, there was only going to be a small area designated in the back for adults that were invited to join. With the event about to begin in less than an hour, the coordinators, among them a man named Yankee Meyer, were making last-minute preparations. And as Yankee was arranging some chairs, he noticed that an elderly man with a white beard made himself comfortable on one of the seats right in the front, which was reserved for the kids. Now, if he was a younger man, Yankee would walk over and say, "Excuse me, you're in the wrong section. This is not for adults." It's for kids, but this was an elderly man with a white beard. He's got to speak respectfully, so he goes over and he says, "Excuse me, it's very nice that you're here. And we do have a section reserved for adults. You're sitting in the kids section." To which the man looks up and says, "Yeah, I know, but I want to be here. This is where I want to be. I'm not going to sit there. I'm going to stay here." And Yankee was a bit taken by this, but again, he has to let it go. He's an elderly man. But what happened next is something that Yankee Meyer says he'll never forget. This elderly man removes 2 old brittle pictures from his pocket. And he puts it in front of him. And he tells him his story. "You see these pictures? These are my 2 children. When the Germans came into our town, they killed everyone. My children suffered the same fate as everyone else. I escaped somehow. And all that I have to remember my 2 sons are these pictures." Each word the man spoke was filled with such deep emotion as if he was reliving the pain all over again. And then he said to Yankee, I know that this gathering is all for children. And I know how holy an event this is, that thousands of children will come together. And so I know that my children in the heavenly world, they'll join, they'll come down, they'll be here. So I want to be here with them. I want to spend some time with them. Yankee was moved beyond words, astonished by the man's pain, but more how he perceived the presence of his children. Gathering himself, he asked the old man if he would want to be the cantor. And he said, no, I just want to sit here with my kids. Just want to sit here with my kids. That's being tuned into the spiritual dimension. That's feeling the perspective of the neshama, of the soul. That's the different perception of reality. It's deeper. This man perceived the presence of his long-lost children in that room, sitting next to him. It's a perspective I've seen real people whom I know to be able to connect with and draw strength, even when the pain and distress seems unfathomable and unbearable. They can tune in because of the strength of their soul, because of the spirituality of the soul. If we exercise our spiritual muscles and we feed our souls what it really needs to overcome spirituality deficiency syndrome, we can all develop that level of spiritual awareness and that sense of connection with those we love, with those who are no longer with us. I'd like to conclude with an almost mind-boggling story. It was a Yom Kippur in a little synagogue in the old city of Jerusalem. The mood was spiritually intense, particularly for this 18-year-old boy that was there. His name was Uri Berkowitz. Uri Berkowitz was spending his first Yom Kippur without his father, Shimon Berkowitz, of blessed memory. His father had not been sick for long. His illness lasted only for a few months, and then he was gone. And Uri had been so close to his father, and the tragedy was taking its toll. And it was a trying and emotional time for Uri and for his mother. Suddenly, in the middle of the prayers, sirens begin to blare. At first, the shul went silent, and then seconds later, though, everyone began to run for the exit. The siren was signaling that Israel was at war. Fathers and sons, husbands and brothers would all be heading out to fight within a matter of minutes. By now, you figured it out. It was Yom Kippur, 1973. Uri realized he had only a few moments until he would be picked up by members of his unit, so he chose to make a dash to the Kotel, the Western Wall. He was just a few feet away from it. And there he was. He just had minutes. He wanted to run and say a quick prayer. He ran as fast as he could, and he nearly collapsed into the Kotel's welcoming arms, and he poured out his heart to God, and he begged that he and all the Chayalim should come home safely, that his widowed mother should not have to suffer any more pain, any more sorrow. And after crying from the depths of his soul, he felt this urge to place a kvittel, to place a note in the wall, as everyone had done, but it's Yom Kippur, he can't write, but he wanted to put some prayer into the wall. And so he just came up with this idea, it just came into his mind. He said he would take a note out of the wall and put it back in as his particular prayer. So he did that. He took a note out of the wall and put it right back in and said, "Dear God, I attach my prayers to this note," and he put it in the wall. As soon as he did this, he felt something awkward. And he says, "I know it was wrong, but this curiosity came over to me as to the note that I just partnered with. What was written on that note? What did it say? But I shouldn't. It's someone else's note. It's private." But he had this urging. He needed to see it. After all, he was now partners with this individual. And so he felt, okay, he can justify opening the note. And he opens the note. It says, "Almighty God, I know that I don't have long to live. So I'm asking you to please protect my son, Uri, the son of Shimon, from harm. I will not be there to take care of him, and so I turn to you, his Father in heaven, and I ask you to do what I cannot. Please watch over his mother, my dear wife, Devorah Bas Yitzchak." Signed, Shimon ben Yaakov. Uri cried out in shock as new tears streamed down his cheeks. The note he selected out of thousands was a note his own father had placed in the wall days before his own passing, beseeching the Almighty to watch over him and to watch over his mother. The emotion, as you can imagine, was overwhelming. He placed the note in his pocket, whispered a prayer that he merit to come back, and returned the note to the wall. A few moments later, he was whisked off to war. After 3 months, Uri returned home. He hugged his mother tightly as they cried on each other's shoulders, and soon thereafter he made his way to the kotel. Feeling a sense of deja vu, he fell in love again with the warm embrace of the Kotel HaMa'aravi. He then reached into his pocket, and he pulled out the folded piece of paper that had been with him throughout the trying weeks of battle. He kissed the note one final time and placed it inside the crevice of the wall. He whispered a prayer of thanks to the Almighty for bringing him home safely, confident that he had a good advocate up there pulling for him as well. Now you hear the story and you say, what are the chances? What are the chances? And yet I suspect that all of us at some time or another have had some of the most uncanny things happen to us in our lives. Just too oddly timed to be more chance and happenstance. Perhaps not as stark and as powerful as Uri's experience on Yom Kippur of 1973, but awesome and incredible nonetheless. But then lest we get too carried away with ourselves, we immediately chalk it up to coincidence. Well, you know what they say, a coincidence is a miracle in which God chooses to remain anonymous. My dear friends, as Jews, we believe there to be a real and dynamic connection between the realms of the physical and the spiritual. And whether or not we receive messages from our departed loved ones from on high, I can tell you that they certainly hear ours. That's when we make the most of our lives on this earth, when we fulfill the purpose for which our souls were sent down all these flights, and they're happy for us, and they're proud of us, and they're pulling for us every step of the way. So let's embrace a life of spirituality. Let's look for those mitzvot that we can incorporate into our lives. Let's find a way to be more in touch with our soul and feed it the vitamins that it so needs. I invite you to visit jewishacademy.com for our spring semester. We have classes every day and every night of the week over Zoom, over YouTube, if we can figure out better how to work it. We'll get there little by little. And I want you to take upon yourself a resolution, wherever it is that you live. When this pandemic is over, and when we're back, when our doors are open, when congregations are back, make your way to Shul on Shabbat. Make Shabbat part of your lives. Join together with the congregation on a regular basis. Embrace a community, embrace a Jewish community and grow together in our Yiddishkeit, in our pursuit of spirituality. Thank you for joining me.